The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund and by
Florida's Space Coast Office of Tourism, representing destinations from Titusville to Cocoa Beach to Melbourne Beach. The Space Coast has a diverse 72 miles of beach, including surf towns and sea turtle nests. We have inspiring attractions, including the Kennedy Space Center, Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science, and the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. More information is available at www.visitspacecoast.com.
and by the Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Council of Arts and Culture, and the state of Florida.
We bring you the Circus, the Pied Piper whose magic tunes lead children of all ages from 6 to 60 into a tinsel and spun candy world of reckless beauty and mounting laughter and whirling thrill, of rhythm, excitement, and grace, of daring and blaring and dance, of high-stepping horses and high-flying stars. But behind all this, the circus is a massive machine whose very life depends on discipline, motion, and speed. A mechanized army on wheels that rolls over any obstacle in its path, that meets calamity again and again, but always comes up smiling.
Welcome to Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. I'm Ben Brotemarkle. We're at the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art in Sarasota. When John Ringling died in 1936, he left this museum and all of its contents to the state of Florida. Ringling became known as the king of the circus, but he began his career in 1884 working with 5 of his brothers as a circus clown.
The Ringling Brothers were just mesmerized by the magic of the circus that had passed through their hometown. And so the older brothers, Al and Otto and Alf T., thought about starting their own show. John was much younger, but at the age of 16, he joined his brothers who were traveling and performing, and John acted as a comic figure. He called himself the Dude, which was more like a dandy. So it almost, in a sense, kind of alluded to the life that he would lead. He was looking to raise himself up, but in that time period, as a teenager, he was doing it for laughs.
I think really early on in the show, the brothers all had to do, it was sort of all hands on deck, and they were really putting the show together themselves. It was a scrappy little show. Their animal offerings were, a dog and nothing much more exotic than that. But what we see happening is they really start to develop a strong sense of how to manage and administer the circus rather than just be the performers themselves. There's a famous quote they would say, "We divided the job, but we stuck together." And I think that was really the key to their success. Or competitors referred to them as a many-headed hydra. So I think that ability that they each sort of specialized, they had a niche talent, and for John it became what's known as the advance man position. So he would travel out in front of the circus and arrange logistics. So he really had a mind for logistics, for arranging everything. He had to make sure that he found a site that would be appropriate for the circus. He had to pick a town and the right time when the harvest had just come in or whatever it was so that people had money to spend on the circus. He had to arrange for all the provisions and the food. So really he got to know America really well through that role, but he was really instrumental in scheduling the circus and making sure everything fell into place.
By 1889, the Ringling Brothers Circus was traveling across the country by train. Eventually, they owned their own caravan with more than 100 rail cars. John Ringling's personal rail car is on display in the Circus Museum at the Ringling Museum of Art Complex in Sarasota.
In the Ringling collection, we have the Wisconsin Pullman Car, and it was the car that John and Mabel Ringling bought the year they got married, and they used it to travel along with the circus, but they also used it for their own travels across the country. So on occasion, it was included in the circus train in the 100-plus cars that carried Ringling Brothers in the early 20th century, but more often than not, it was taking them to other locations like here in Sarasota, Florida.
So we have the Wisconsin here at the Ringling. and that was John and Mabel's private rail car, one of a couple that they had. And it's the Wisconsin, after the brothers who had spent a lot of time in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And it really is just sort of a testament to the life they had achieved for themselves, John and Mabel, at that point. It's incredibly luxurious, and it's beautifully decorated. It's been beautifully restored. So we see them traveling with the circus in the height of luxury, in probably stark contrast to the performers who were all crowded in. I mean, some of them had, more ample space, but John and Mabel were really living the high life when they were traveling with the circus.
So the Wisconsin, which is the car here on the museum property, is absolutely beautiful. It was the private car of the Ringlings. And so the inside of it is gorgeous. Wood paneling and, cush, fluffy beds, and nothing like what I lived in. But there was all sorts of different types of rooms and styles depending on who you were. Because I was a clown, I'm kind of lower in the echelon of the circus world. But the big stars would have large rooms similar to what the Ringlings had. There was one circus star who actually had a grand piano in her train car, in her room. But most people had what was called a stateroom, which was like a 9-by-6 room. And then there'd be a hallway. And so when there's train runs were happening, you could actually go up and down the train and visit people and, have access to everybody else on the train. Back in the 40s, when there were about 1,000 people working for Ringling, they had 2 train cars. And the first train car would have all the things that were necessary to get the tent up and moving. So they would have the kitchen, because, of course, the circus lives on their stomach. All the draft horses and draft animals, the work animals, and the workers. And then they would pack up and leave. And then the second train would have all the performers and the tent and anything that happened, like during the show itself. So as the show was on, they would actually be loading the train. And this is the same to today. So when the audience members would leave the tent after a performance, it would just be the big top and nothing else. It'd be just like vanished. And by the next morning, it was all gone. It was like the circus was never there.
In 1907, the Ringling Brothers bought the Barnum and Bailey Circus, but they didn't merge operations until the winter of 1918-1919.
The Ringling Brothers were so ambitious, and they watched for an opening to grow their business. So after James Bailey took the Barnum and Bailey Circus to Europe for 5 years, the brothers had grown their routes, and when Bailey came back, he passed away a couple of years later, and the Ringling Brothers bought the show. And they did travel those 2 units separately for a number of years because that meant that much more ground that they could cover. So the Barnum and Bailey title had this weight on the eastern seaboard. People knew that title, and that was what they wanted to see when they saw Circus. And out in the Midwest, it was the Ringling show. And so it was really successful for them to keep the 2 shows running. But as the century progressed, you get to the beginnings of World War I, and you also see the death of some of the older Ringling brothers. And so at that point, the existing brothers had to really evaluate how they could keep the business going and keep their very close handle on how it was maintained. They were so hands-on that when they were down to 2 or 3 brothers, they needed to combine the shows. And so they did that for the 1919 season. You see the first combination of this mega circus that opens in Madison Square Gardens.
Really, it's a great publicity stunt if you think about it, to take the 2 kind of greatest shows on earth and combine them into one. And you always hear circus historians say if you could go back and see any circus show, it would be that 1919 show, because it was bringing together all of the best performers in the world. And so at that point, they were really undisputedly the entertainment kings of the world, and they had that powerhouse of one combined show.
John and Mabel Ringling were what might be called soulmates today. They married in 1905 and became interested in buying property in Sarasota.
So in 1911, John and Mabel purchased 20 acres right on the bayfront here. It came with a beautiful wood frame house known as Palms Elysian, and they enjoyed Palms Elysian for well over a decade before they, in the Roaring 20s, they decided they had the funds and the means and the desire to build their dream home, which is Cottazon. But the early years, they weren't incredibly active in the local social scene. They would come and go. John was traveling with the circus a lot. We know Mabel liked to stay in Sarasota. She loved to garden. So one of her first projects on the property was the Rose Garden, which she built and had installed in 1913, and it's been maintained continuously ever since then. And she had a couple of other informal gardens as well. So I think she really liked kind of being here, engaging with the gardens and the land. It was a different life than their apartment in New York City or traveling on a circus train. I think it kind of gave her room to breathe. But again, it wasn't really until the 1920s when John positions himself as a capitalist and decides he's going to develop Sarasota real estate that they get a little bit more involved in the social scene at that point in Sarasota. And I think Mabel, in supporting John, he's building business relationships and really developing the area. And she sort of stepped up to that role as a society woman. She was the first president of the Founders Circle, which is a garden club that was meant to beautify Sarasota. And I think that gave her a lot of kind of prestige in the local community, made a lot of connections. And before you know it, she's having bridge parties and luncheons and dances and all sorts of events. And I think that really bolstered John's efforts in what he was doing to improve and develop Sarasota.
John and Mabel came here in 1911 for the first time to get a sense of the area and really fell in love with the coastline. And they bought an estate here, the estate that the museum sits on. At the time, it was the Thompson residence. Charles Thompson was another showman. And John and Mabel bought his initial house, and they spent a number of years in that building before deciding to embark upon this major legacy project of building the Cottazon and then eventually the Art Museum. This wasn't their only home. They also had homes in New Jersey and would travel extensively across the country. But I think that this was a place that they really felt at ease and where they felt that they could be together and focused on one another.
In 1926, John and Mable Ringling completed construction on their ornate mansion called Cottazon, or House of John. It was modeled after Venetian palaces and built with entertaining visitors in mind. Mabel Ringling was particularly involved in the design of this spectacular home.
The Cottazon is actually listed on the blueprint documents as the residence of Mrs. John Ringling. So we see very much how invested Mabel was in creating a home for herself and her husband. She was actively involved in speaking with the architect, Dwight James Baum, about palazzos she'd seen in Venice and these other ideas that would help create this amazing mansion here on Sarasota Bay. It echoes historic references of Venetian architecture, but there are many personal touches. A lot of the murals and the artwork that you see within the house really speak to Mabel's personality and her love of entertaining. There are wonderful grand spaces to invite people into.
Cottazon in the Venetian dialect means House of John, but the museum joke around here is that it's actually the House of Mabel. This was her pet project, and really she got to fulfill all of her wildest dreams in building this house. I think John spared no expense, and she was really able to kind of realize everything that she had ever hoped for. So they fell in love with Venice early on in their travels to Europe when they would go and look for new circus acts and just sort of enjoy Europe. And so by the time the 1920s rolls around, John is incredibly wealthy at that point. Their lifestyle has really evolved, and they decided they needed a home kind of befitting of that new status. Also, again, strategically, he's thinking about how can I build sort of a showpiece to show my investor friends what is possible in this sort of semi-tropical, fantastical landscape that is Sarasota.
The Cottazon was a favorite place for events here in Sarasota. Mabel would host the garden club for small lunches and things like that, but then they would have wonderful parties where they would invite some of the who's who of New York and cultural elites. The Ziegfelds were here. Billie Burke, the actress, was here with her husband. And they would have events that would range for whole weekends.
It would be great to go back and have a party with John and Mabel in the 1920s at the Cottazon, absolutely. You can read newspaper reports from the late 20s. Some accounts say, there was a party of 300. I've read up to 475 people would be at any kind of given party. They had a beautiful organ installed in the house, so they could have concerts with the organ. Of course, they would hire live musicians as well. There would be dancing. There's a beautiful ballroom in that space. And they've got a huge marble terrace outside right on the water, so it could really accommodate a lot of people. So they would have the big parties, the lavish parties, and then maybe some more casual daytime affairs. Mabel loved bridge, so she would have bridge tournaments and luncheons for her circle of women friends. And then just entertaining on a small scale, if you were lucky enough to be a guest at the house, they had a 125-foot yacht, so you could go out, cruising on the bay. John might take you over to look at some of his real estate that he was developing. They had clay tennis courts. There was beachfront along the way, so you could swim. They had a saltwater swimming pool. So really, there was no shortage of entertainment and things to do at the Cottazon.
The year after Cottazon was built, John Ringling made Sarasota the official winter home of the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus.
John Ringling had a vision to create an economic impact on the Sarasota area by bringing the winter quarters of his circus here. He realized that by having the people of the circus come and invest in property, that was going to be helpful. And he also had an idea that the Sarasota winter quarters could be a tourist attraction, and it was one of the earliest draws to the state, which is well known for our tourist attractions. The winter quarters was set up as a place that was very good for the business. The performers were actually able to practice in winter versus a winter in Bridgeport, Connecticut or Baraboo, Wisconsin. They were able to be outside showing off their tricks, and the Ringlings were able to sell tickets to that. So it was an economic boon for the city and also for the show itself.
Bringing the circus here in 1927 changed the entire tenor of what the city is, and we still feel that today. Because not only did it turn Sarasota into even more of a tourist destination than it had already been, but we have circus families now who would come down for winter quarters but then put roots down here. So there's no shortage of circus performers still today from these families who had worked in the Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, and so that legacy of circus is very much alive.
I have always been a performer. I've always wanted to be a performer. I started out that wanted to be a ballerina, but was told my neck wasn't long enough. So my whole life is tragedy. I had met a friend who was a clown, and I really loved how the clown interacts with the audience, because in regular theater, there's what they call the fourth wall. So the audience and the performers don't ever interact. But in the case of the clown is partner with the audience, and I just love that. So I was very intrigued with it. Ringling Brothers at that time had a clown college, and they were having auditions, and I went to the auditions and was accepted to clown college, and the rest is history.
Since the early 2000s, Karen Bell has worked with the Circus Arts Conservatory, using her skills as a clown to stimulate the memories of Alzheimer patients, tutor students in math and science, and cheer up hospital patients. For 30 years before that, she was the only female clown to be featured in a solo ring in Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus.
The first year I was on the road, I had one circus. A gag is a clown skit, and I had one gag, and in that gag I was a statue. So I had a lot of time to think about my next year and what I wasn't going to do the next year, which was be a statue. So I started writing my own material, because I'm just that kind of person. And I came in right at the right time. Irvin Feld had just passed away the year I went to clown college, so Kenneth Feld had just taken over. And he was really looking for new and different kind of clowning style than what he had been raised with, what he'd seen his entire life. And I was that person. So I came in with stuff that they hadn't been seeing, much more theatrical clowning. And he loved it, so I ended up with a solo ring gag as one of the gags that I wrote. And that year I had 2 ring gags, but one was solo and then one was with another guy. So.
The circus made John and Mabel Ringling incredibly wealthy, but their other business interests included ownership in railways, oil fields, and management of New York's Madison Square Garden. The Ringlings' wealth allowed them to indulge their love of travel and collecting art.
John and Mabel decided that they wanted to build a legacy, and there was a very clear intention to do that in founding the art museum. And so in 1924, they worked with the art dealer Julius Bowler to begin purchasing works of art. And between 1924 and 1931, they had amassed a collection of over 600 old master paintings. It leans heavily towards the Baroque masters and Renaissance. Those were the areas that Ringling was particularly interested in. They were also the kind of paintings that were entering the market pretty readily. So it's a kind of handshake between an interest in aesthetics and just the market, what's available. But ultimately, what John and Mabel wanted was to leave their mark on the culture of this community in a bigger way beyond just the circus roots.
John had dabbled in art collecting from basically the turn of the century, about 1910, 1915. He starts making art purchases, but without any real direction or purpose. And it's not till 1925 that he decides he's going to build an art museum right here on the property where the museum still is today and where they were living. And so he sets his mind to this massive undertaking, and within 6 years he had acquired basically the bulk of the collection that we have today. Right away he engages an architect to build to work on designs, and he's able to, through his travels, he's going to Europe very frequently to look for new circus acts, but while he's there, he's also able to purchase a lot of artwork and ship it back to America. He and Mabel also frequented auctions, especially in New York, but in the Northeast. A lot of the Gilded Age mansions that had been prominent several decades earlier were being torn down to make way for commercial buildings and skyscrapers, and all of the contents of those buildings were being sold at auction. So he gets a lot of fine art that way as well, but also furnishings for the Katazan, beautiful furniture, tapestries, and things like that.
Mabel Ringling died in 1929. John married Emily Buck the following year, but it was not a happy union. By 1933, Ringling filed for divorce. The Great Depression was having a significant impact on Ringling's finances, and his health was in decline. John Ringling died in December 1936. John was reunited with the true love of his life, Mabel Ringling, in death. They are buried together near their Sarasota home.
The intent was always for John and Mabel to have a beautiful crypt in the Museum of Art courtyard. This was really their legacy. They had no children, and they were very cognizant of what their legacy would be, especially to the people of Florida and the people of Sarasota. So the intent was that they would be buried in a crypt in the courtyard, kind of towards the bay, right under where the statue of David stands today, a very prominent place in the museum. Ultimately, that was never realized, and so after many years, it was 1991 when we were able to bring their bodies back and inter them here on the property in a little garden right next to the Katazan, which was really their testament to one another and sort of their love story. So it's very fitting that they're here today.
Today, the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art complex includes the original 21-gallery museum, as well as galleries of modern art and Asian art, the Ringling's unique mansion, Katazan, the Oslo Theater, and the Circus Museum. While the Ringling legacy lives on in Sarasota, in 2017, the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus ceased operation.
They cited the retirement of the performing elephants, and that certainly colored public opinion both ways. People who missed the elephants and others who had really never been in favor of the performing animals in the first place. So that was certainly a factor. The other factor, realistically, is that society changes, and spectacles of live entertainment on that scale are available in many different formats. And so it was really hard for the circus to compete for that dollar from consumers, whether it was going to motocross events or ice shows or any number of other entertainment options. The circus really had to fight to sell tickets, and I think that was one of the reasons behind the closing of Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. But what we see here in Sarasota is that the circus arts themselves are going through a new vibrant rejuvenation. It's in a sense because the Ringling name had dominated circus for so long, and many people in this country hear the word circus and all they think of is Ringling. But many artists now are coming forward and able to explore circus arts in new ways and in new venues and bring them to their communities in really meaningful ways.
It was sad to see Ringling Brothers decide not to perform anymore. And a lot of my friends lost their jobs, unfortunately, that were performing on the show. And a lot of us just have our life was there. And a lot of families that I know were raised there. Kids, grew up on the circus. So it was a very sad time, but that doesn't mean that the circus isn't going to continue and be strong and well and move on. So they made a business choice, but that doesn't mean the circus is going anywhere.
John Ringling was inducted into the Florida Artists Hall of Fame in 1987. In 2000, the state legislature turned over his entire estate to Florida State University to manage. You've been watching Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. Visit us anytime on the web at myfloridahistory.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ben Brotemarkle. The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund and by
Florida's Space Coast Office of Tourism, representing destinations from Titusville to Cocoa Beach to Melbourne Beach. The Space Coast has a diverse 72 miles of beach, including surf towns and sea turtle nests. We have inspiring attractions, including the Kennedy Space Center, Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science, and the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. More information is available at www.visitspacecoast.com.
and by the Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Council of Arts and Culture, and the state of Florida.